Hey everyone, and welcome back. Last episode, we worked on matrices and we created an orthographic matrix and passed it into the shader so that we can use screen coordinates of 800 by 600. In this episode, we're going to be talking about textures. Now, this episode is going to be a little shorter than I was originally planning. I was going to do textures and throw in the beginning sections of the GUI in this one episode. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to render the texture. So at the end, we are going to be rendering it. We just won't have GUI set up yet. Uh, I'm going to record that in another episode immediately after this one, just because it's going to be a little bit too long if I record all of it into one episode, but they will be posted at the same time. So, uh, right here I just put color.blue. I did have, I believe, a color value in there that was blue, but might as well just use the color class that we have set up. So, what we need to do is we need to create a texture class. So we'll go ahead and do that. Texture. All right. Now that we're in here, I'm going to go ahead and do some imports that I know that we're going to be using, just so that we don't have issues that we had in previous episodes of things not having red lines and stuff until the end. So, first we're going to import static org lightweight Java game library dot OpenGL dot GL11. And I don't know why. I just put it inside of there. There. Now, not only are we going to be using GL11, going to be using GL13. And on top of that, we're going to be using STB image, uh, load and image free. So that is import static org lightweight Java game library STB. It's STB image dot STBI. Yeah, it's an underscore image free. You just copy that, paste it below, and do load. All right, and we can do the rest later. It should automatically pop up for us now. So the first thing we need is the name of the texture that we're importing. And this is really important because whenever we go to find textures, we can just look for the name. So it just makes it a little bit easier for us. So we're going to do private string name equals, I'll just leave it empty because we'll set it with the constructor. Then we need private and ID, which points us to the texture that has been processed. And we need the width of the texture, We need the height of the texture. Now the next one we need is we need a list of all the textures that we have bred in. This way we can find one on the fly at any point during runtime and grab it from that list. And then whenever the window or the application closes, we can loop through it and we can delete all those textures out of memory. So do private static list textures. Name it texture instances equals new array list of textures. Java util. Java util. There we go. Now we need a temporary variable. We'll get to the reason behind this temporary variable in just a little bit. So we'll go private static texture tmp equals null. And last but not least, we need an iterator variable. We are going to cache it in here. That way, anytime we're going to do any kind of iteration, we're not creating a new variable every loop. A lot of people have this issue where they're creating variables every time a function is called. The best approach to that is to cache that iterator variable just so that you don't have to create it every time. You can just reuse the same variable. And you'll see me doing that a lot. Alright, so now we need the constructor, and what it's going to do is it's going to take in a string file name. Alright, so then the file name, we will actually just set the name to the file name. So we'll just say name equals file name. Now what we need to do is we need to create some buffers for width, height, and for channels. So all these are going to be int buffers. So we're going to do width equals buffer utils dot create int buffer. Yeah, set it to 1. And I spelled that wrong. Come on, dummy. There we go. So now we need to do some imports. If my computer would knock it off. Buffer utils and int buffer. So we can just duplicate this. So paste, paste, do height and channels. Alright, so next thing we need to do is to load the data into a byte buffer. So load the image data into a byte buffer and store it so that we can do what we need to do with it. So we'll go byte buffer data equals stbi underscore load. And now we need to pass in our yeah, pass in the information to get to our folder. Our folder path, there we go. So what we're going to use is res, obviously, and I'm going to have a folder in there called textures. Now we need to pass in the file name. I don't know. Maybe we'll add that later. I was going to put the .png thing, but we're not always going to be using PNG. So we'll just leave the file name with the with whatever it is, whether it be MPEG or whatever. I don't know, my brain's not working, so. All right, so after we pass in the file path, we need to pass in the width buffer, height buffer, and the channels buffer. Set that bad boy to 4. All right, come on, there we go. Now we got the byte buffer on. So now we need to generate the texture ID. So we're going to go ID equals GL gen textures. And now we need to set the width of the texture up here with the size of these. So to do that, we are just going to go this dot width equals width dot get. I didn't say argument. And then this dot height equals height dot get. I do not want that. All right, so that sets the height. So now anytime we need the height or width or size in general of this texture, it's going to be stored right here, and we can grab that anytime we need. So now we need to bind the image, or bind the texture. So we're going to go GL bind texture. It's going to be of type GL texture 2D. And pass in the ID. So that binds this texture. So then after this, we need to set the texture parameters. So we're going to go GL text parameter F. And then we're going to call GL texture 2D. So that's what we're using. Now we need to do the min filter. So GL underscore min underscore filter. There we go. And set it to GL nearest. Then the next one we need is parameter F. It's the same GL texture 2D, D. And right here we need to set the mag filter. So it is exactly the same, just mag right here. And filter, and then it too is nearest. Alright, now we got those two set up. Now we need to do this big long bastard. Alright, So next we go GL, not image 2D. Correct? I hope I did that right. Okay, GL text image 2D. And GL underscore texture. What am I doing? Oh, there we go. So GL texture 2D, we're going to set this to 0, and we're going to be using RGBA for red, green, blue, alpha. So RGBA. Now we're going to pass in the width. So this dot width. And we're using width of the texture, not the int buffer width. So don't just put width, or else it's going to pull this int buffer and you're going to get errors. Same with the height. I'm going to set this to 0, and I'm going to be using unsigned bytes. So, go. Wait, am I ahead of myself? Yeah, I am. I am ahead of myself. RGBA. Yeah, so we're going to be passing in RGBA. And then GL underscore unsigned byte. And then we're going to pass in the data. So all we're doing is we're just setting the information using the data. And we're going to call stbi underscore image underscore free. We're going to free that data. Now we're going to add this texture to our list of textures. So texture instances dot and then pass in this. All right, and that's it for the constructor. So now every time we import a new texture, it creates it, passes in all the data, frees that data, and then passes it into that list. So the next thing is to be able to get the ID from whatever script we're needing it in. Because since we have it set to private, yeah, we have this should be private too. There. So, private. All right, so all the information is private. So we're gonna have to use, getter methods. We don't need setters. So just getter methods to get that information. So we're going to say public int ID, and then just return the ID. And as you can tell, whenever I have something short like this, I'll just keep it onto one line. Just makes it a little easier. So whenever we call texture.id, it will return the ID. And now we need a binding function so that we can bind this texture. No, I'll do bind first. Bind. Now all we're going to do is we're just going to set it to texture 0 and then pass in the ID. So we need to call GL active texture and then GL I thought I had texture. So like that? No, it's not. Sorry, I'm just kind of going off the top of my head. That's what most of these episodes are, is just kind of winging it. I've done it so many times before, I don't really need much to look at. So, but I do the occasional error. All right, now that we have the active texture set to 0, we need to bind the texture GL underscore texture underscore 2D, and then pass in the ID. And that will bind our texture so that we can use it in our shader. Now we need to unbind, which is almost the same as just normal binding. So we do GL bind texture, still going to call GL underscore texture 2D. I'm just going to set that to 0, and that will unbind this texture. So it'll get us ready to bind another texture, or no texture at all. That's whatever. All right, now we need a find method. So this will, why did I make that private? All right, so this method will loop through our textures and find the texture that we're looking for and return it back to us. So we're going to need the texture name that we're wanting. Well, yeah, I'm going to return it. Dope. All right, so here, say for I equals 0, I is lower than texture instances dot size and I plus plus. And this is where our iterator variable comes into use. Okay, change I to static. All right, so now we need to call, or now we set the temp variable that we did before, because we're going to be accessing it multiple times. So that's why I'm using this temp variable. So I'm not just constantly getting the texture instance like that iterated variable. So that way we just cache it into temp, and then we say instances.get I. I set it to TMP, didn't I? Yep. All right. So then that caches it into the temp variable. So now we can say if tmp.name equals texture name plus dot png, I guess. No, because I wanted to. Not all files will be PNG. So if temp.name, let's go starts with. There we go. That should work, right? You better change to starts with. There we go. So now if it starts with the texture name, so now we don't even have to worry about the stupid ending crap. Okay. Then we return the temp variable. So we loop through all the textures, we compare the name, and if it equals the name that we're looking for, we just return that variable. And if it's not found, meaning we go through all this loop and it has not returned, then we're just going to return null. So if we're looking for it, we get a null return, then obviously it was not found. So the next thing we need to do is a cleanup method. So we're going to go public static void cleanup. Now we are going to do this exact same loop. And then say GL, GL delete textures, and then say, no, let's make it easier. We're going to use a loop that, no, that'll work. I don't freaking care, really. All right. Texture instances dot get I. Oh, get I dot ID. There we go. There it is. So now that cleans it up. So now we need the ability to get the textures, like get this texture list, because we're going to need this texture list for several different things. So not only to find it, not only to delete it, but we also need to have our editor grab these textures and show us in the editor what textures we have ready to go that we can set on whatever. We'll add a drag and drop and rendering in the project panel and all this other fun goodness. All right, so after the cleanup, we'll say public static list of textures. And call it, we'll actually just use the get textures name. Yeah. And we will return texture instances. All right, so that will get the textures. Now we need, right? Yes. So now we need to be able to get the width. So public static int width, and then return width, and public static int height. Wait, why am I making that static? That isn't static. There. All right, and I believe that's it for the texture class. Now what we need to do is need to, let's see here, yeah, need to go into here. Now some of the stuff in the shaders I changed a little bit. For instance, this, now it says GL underscore frag color equals color. I don't remember if I mentioned it last episode, but this is basically the exact same thing as what was on there before, Except for I'm not outing the color, I'm just setting the frag color directly. So you don't really have to change it at all. I just set it that way. It's just something I was doing when I was doing my commenting on some of the scripts. I was like, yeah, I might as well change that. So if anything's rearranged or whatever that you notice, like mine looks a little bit different than yours, it's just because I just kind of rearranged it a little bit. All right, so what we need in here is we need the ability to pass out the UV coordinates. So we're going to go out vec2 UV chords. I don't know why in the hell my alarm just went off. It's in the middle of the afternoon. Alright. So now I'll put that underneath. Say UV chords equals texture chords. Save that. And now the fragment shader needs, just like the color, it needs to have this name, UV chords. Because if you don't, it won't work. So in vector2 UV chords. Now this is pretty simple. All you do is, we're already passing in a color. Right now it's blue, so it's going to give it a bluish tint. So it's going to draw the texture, but it's going to give it a bluish tint, and we'll change that here in just a few. I'm just going to leave it the way that it is with that blue, just so that you can see it working with the texture. So all we're going to do is multiply it by texture 2D. Oh, I haven't even set that up yet. All right, I'll just go ahead and do this. Sampler, which is going to be our uniform variable uh, for the texture stuff. So the sampler and the UV coordinates that we're passing in. So we need a uniform, and it's going to be a sampler 2D. I'm going to call it sampler. So this is the texture that we have bound at some point in time. So texture 2D, you just pass in the sampler and the coordinates, and it'll pick out where on the texture it's going to be and what color it is. So we're just multiplying our color that we're passing in by the color of the pixel on that texture. So inside of here, now we can actually put in the rendering code. But we're going to change that after this episode, and we're no longer going to be actually doing all this crap inside of the core class. We're not going to be doing any of that. The editor script will be doing it for us, or our GUI class, that is. So we're going to do some rearranging and stuff in the next episode as well. So we need to create a new texture. So new texture, and in here we're going to pass in the name of our texture. Just a second. Desktop. I think I have a Yeah, I have some Minecraft textures. Let's use this one. This Super Mario World tile set I kind of threw together for something I was working on. And this will actually be something really good for what we're going to be doing whenever we do the GUI things here in just like, I don't know, 15 minutes or whatever. So we'll be able to, what we're going to do with the GUI is we're going to be able to draw the entire texture, which we're actually going to do here in a minute. And then after that, we're going to create a GUI function so that we can render just a small portion of this image. So you will be able to use tile sets or whatever you're wanting to do. You can actually atlas anything. There's our resources folder. Now we need to actually, yeah, while we're in here, create a new folder inside of our resources. Call it textures. And paste that in there. All right. Now we need to, I don't know why that's open. Go in here and we need to refresh this. There we go. So now it's in there. So what did I name that? So you can use whatever image you have. It doesn't really matter. But for me personally, I'm going to be using this right here. But you can type in whatever the name of the file is. All you need is what's written right here. You don't need the file path at all because remember inside of the texture class, we're just adding that onto it. So it just makes it simple so that whenever we're importing textures, we're not typing in a whole freaking path the whole time. So that makes it a little bit easier. All right. So now we have the texture. And where do I want to put this? After the projection. All right. So right here, right before we render the mesh, we'll call texture.bind. And then after it renders, we're going to call text.unbind. So then that just unbinds the texture. Right now it's not really necessary. We can just keep it bound, but whatever. That works perfectly fine. Alright, so that should work. Yeah, there we go. Awesome. First try. Alright, so now that it's blue, so you see that it's multiplying with the color. So now, right here, call white. So white is just will render the actual color of the texture. Because since it's multiplied, all these values, the RGBA is all ones. So whenever you multiply it, you get just the colors of the texture. So there it is. Now we don't have alpha currently set up with OpenGL, but we will do that in the next episode probably. Yeah, I will have to do it in the next episode because some of the things that we're going to be doing, we need that set up. All right, so then that does that. So I will see you in the next episode, which I will be recording in just a few moments, and it will be all posted together. All right, thanks for watching, and I will see you in a few minutes.